This week,
the world's going to have to invest in about $14 trillion worth of grid in order to accommodate all the capacity that's going to be put on.
Connecting the dots to turn on the lights. If countries around the world want to meet their renewable targets, they're going to need a reliable way to deliver clean energy. We look at some of the solutions.
The United States simply doesn't have the same kind of transmission infrastructure to move power around. And that's really going to be a problem going forward.
The United States is in the midst of an energy transition. But how do we move an entire country's power grid from fossil fuels to a cleaner alternative?
What we're contributing here is the potential to grow. So essentially, no one is left behind in the race to development, in the race to making our energy more green.
And what about people off the grid? We look at one company helping rural communities power themselves. I'm Kaylee Lines, and this is Bloomberg Green. Nearly half of the world's electricity will come from renewable energy by 2050, as costs of wind, solar, and battery storage continue to plummet. But creating clean energy is only half the battle. The other half comes from how we transfer it, from where it's produced to where it's needed.
Electrical grids are getting old. In the US, parts are over a century old. Despite its age, it's surprisingly reliable, with a few notable exceptions.
This morning, the power crisis in Texas entering its fourth painful day.
And these exceptions are likely to increase, with more demand and pressure from climate change. Our current model of electricity generation and transmission works a little like a waterfall. The generator sits at the top, be it fossil fuel powered, nuclear, hydro, or from renewables. The electricity flows down into substations that use transformers to convert the energy into practical voltages, which sends it via wire to homes and businesses. Sensors monitor how much electricity goes where, and meters on the back end record how much gets used. This incredibly simplified portrait of electrical grids shows how all energy flows in one direction. It's a top-heavy, centralized power structure. But the proliferation of renewables are allowing end users to generate their own electricity, and in some cases, surpluses that can be sent back to the grid. These areas are called microgrids, islands of self-contained power, or ideally, decentralized generators connected into a larger grid system. How to regulate all this power flowing up and down over a massive transmission network is a huge policy issue. Right now in the US, federally regulated central generators sell power in an auction market to distributors, which are generally regulated by states. With more small generators coming online, it's unclear if this patchwork approach is going to work, and doubtful that it will be the most efficient system. Another aspect of renewables to reckon with is that optimization for these power sources often situates them in locations far from the final customer. This differs from older fossil fuel power stations that were built closer to municipalities. Offshore wind farms are the perfect example. How do we move the power generated back on shore at reasonable cost? Moving electricity is a little like trying to run with a bucket full of water. Some electricity is lost during transmission in the form of heat, which compounds over long distances. One solution that's being proposed is essentially a bigger bucket. Giant, ultra-high voltage direct current cables that would connect power grids internationally. An added advantage would be that renewables, if given transmission capacity, could power the dark side of the Earth while the flip side is in sunshine, further reducing our reliance on fossil fuels to provide constant energy. The cost of building this massive infrastructure project will be huge, and regulating it will take perhaps more international cooperation than ever seen before.
Well, ever since President Xi Jinping pitched the idea of a global energy internet to the United Nations 6 years ago, China has been trying to persuade the world to build high-voltage highways that would form its backbone. That plan to wrap the planet in a web of intercontinental made-in-Beijing power lines has gone pretty much nowhere. But the fortunes of so-called supergrids appear to be turning, just maybe not on the scale Xi first envisioned. Joining me now is Mark Champion, Bloomberg's senior reporter for international affairs, who has been covering this story for us. So China's all over this. Why? And should that concern anyone?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the main reason why China's done it is that they had to develop their grid at such a pace, just because of the scale of growth in China over the last couple of decades. And they were trying to knit together some pretty shaky grids in order to really get power to all those factories that were manufacturing everything for the world. And more recently, what they've started to do is to say, hey, if we have a large renewable energy, solar or wind plant or farm that's going producing electricity out in Tibet. So what they've done is to develop these really long lines, longer than anyone else has developed before, at higher voltages than anyone else has developed before, and they've connected them up. As to whether anyone should be worried, I mean, it's a very good question. What China is saying is we need to build these grids all over the world. So first of all, that's a pretty good commercial proposition for China. They'll do very well in terms of trade. And then secondly, it raises questions, who's going to control this global grid? Who's going to set the standards? And does that matter? And for some people, it does. They worry that it'll be a little bit like when the U.S. built the global financial system after World War II, and that, it's not like the U.S. owns the financial system, the global financial system. Everybody takes part in it, and yet it gave the U.S. enormous influence, and we've discovered that more and more quite recently. So there's some concern about that.
These ideas aren't new. They have been around for a long time, but there were barriers in the past to getting them built at scale. Why would this time be different? Yeah, absolutely. It's these things are not popular. These are huge cables. Often they're overground, and they have to go through a lot of people's backyards. So it's not popular for that reason. Very difficult, more difficult in a democracy where people get to decide whether they want them going overhead. And on top of that, countries aren't generally crazy about volunteering to depend on another country for electricity. With oil, if you don't have oil, you kind of have to. You have to buy your oil from Saudi Arabia or the US or elsewhere. With natural gas, you may have to buy it from Russia because you don't have your own. But with electricity, you can build your own plant. Everybody's got some sun, everybody's got some wind. Some have more than others, but you can do it yourself. So in general, it hasn't been absolutely necessary. It was something that, for example, the European Union did after the war to build a sort of more competitive, a bigger grid. And it's good for making sure that, as with Texas this winter, if you have some major problem in your grid, you can turn on the tap from another one and borrow some electricity, buy some electricity, and it means that you don't have to shut off the lights. What's changed now is that with renewables, if you have a big coal plant, you can just sit it next to the city you want to serve. If you have renewables, offshore, like the UK has been building some huge offshore wind farms in the North Sea. If you want to develop that, you can't do it next to London. You have to put your offshore wind where the wind is, which in this case is offshore. If you look at just how much the climate targets imply that countries are going to have to increase the amount of electricity that they produce and to generate, well, they're going to have to get that from somewhere. A lot of it will be micro-produced on people's roofs, in small utility plants close to cities. But that probably isn't going to be enough. So if I'm looking for renewable energy solutions, are cables my answer?
They're one answer, and not everybody believes that they are the best answer. For some, they're a kind of old school, old think way of producing energy because it's kind of centralized. The Chinese love this because it's centralized. You can control it centrally. You're building huge utility scale power centers, which are it's like a renewable nuclear plant or a renewable coal plant. But for others, there's greater interest, security, efficiency in producing really micro generation and connecting those in smart grids. So there's different ideas about how this is going to pan out, but the sort of consensus is you're going to need it all. the amount of power that we're going to need to generate, in addition to what, I think Bloomberg New Energy Finance has estimated that the world's going to have to invest in about $14 trillion worth of grid in order to accommodate all the capacity that's going to be put on. And some of that is likely, it's pretty certain, we can see it happening now, that it's going to be these big cables. The question is, how much?
All right, Mark Champion, Bloomberg senior reporter for international affairs. Thank you so much. And you can read Mark's Business Week piece in full on your terminal or on Bloomberg.com. Coming up, the road to clean energy. We all know we need to get there, but how? We'll speak to author Russell Gold on how to take the next steps on the path to green. Plus, we've looked at supergrids, but what about mini-grids? We'll explore the sustainable energy solutions powering rural communities. This is Bloomberg Green.
This is Bloomberg Green. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in New York with your Green Brief. The G7 is dropping its target for electric vehicles. Instead, it's now only pledging to speed up efforts to phase out the combustion engine. But it didn't set firm dates. The communique at its latest summit was much more modest than some of the earlier versions under discussion. Oil giant Shell is planning to speed up its plan to cut emissions. It follows a ruling from a Dutch court saying the firm's plans weren't good enough. Shell still plans to appeal, but says it also wants to rise to the challenge posed by the decision. Shell is also eyeing a possible sale of its holdings in the largest U.S. oil field. Swiss voters shot down a plan to reduce the nation's carbon footprint. They rejected a higher levy on CO2 emissions after claims the measure was too costly. The government is now heading back to the drawing board in order to meet its commitment to the Paris climate deal. And that's your Green Brief.
Thanks, Jen. Well, with the rise of solar, wind, and other renewable energy sources, humanity is racing along a path towards clean energy. We're already producing more and more of it, but there's plenty of barriers to overcome to get it where it needs to be. Our next guest is Russell Gold, and he charted the push to renewables in his book, Superpower, One Man's Quest to Transform American Energy. Russell, great to talk to you. So the issue is that you can create energy, you can harness it, then you have to transport it. Is that the biggest pain point?
Absolutely. It's one of the largest problems right now in the deployment of renewables in the United States. The middle of the United States, the plains are an incredible wind resource. The Southwest is an incredible solar resource, but that's simply not where people are, where industry is. And moving the electricity that can be generated there at extraordinarily low cost to the coast where most people live is just incredibly difficult. We don't have the infrastructure right now, and we're really struggling to build it.
What does the infrastructure have to look like?
Well, we're talking about our large transmission lines, mostly DC. I wrote about a group of entrepreneurs that were trying to build a direct current line. I mean, this is what's happening in China. It's what's happening in Germany. And the United States simply doesn't have the same kind of transmission infrastructure to move power around. And that's really going to be a problem going forward in the United States, because it's going to be more difficult to get access to the extraordinarily inexpensive renewables. And a bigger grid means that the grid is more robust, and frankly, it means it's more protected from things like a hack or any kind of other national security intrusion.
But if the electricity itself is inexpensive, is investing in this kind of distribution infrastructure expensive?
It costs a lot of money to build transmission lines, and we're talking in the billions of dollars. But every single person who's looked at this from a bigger picture economic point of view says that investment pays back many times over.
So let's talk about investment. Obviously, the Biden administration has outlined its goals for long-term economic spending, kind of a question mark as to how much of that will actually be realized. But from what you've seen, does it go far enough?
It's a huge step in the direction of creating incentives for private industry to want to build these transmission lines. I mean, one of the biggest ideas that's out there is a transmission tax credit. However, it's not just about money. To build a transmission line is extraordinarily difficult. It is many times more difficult than to build something like a natural gas pipeline, a similar piece of infrastructure. The United States makes it so much easier to build a buried pipeline in terms of eminent domain, in terms of streamlining the process. Building transmission is just extraordinarily difficult. And it's not because we want to make it more difficult.
What can the U.S. learn from other countries in that respect?
Well, I think, getting back to this question of streamlining, one of the things that I think would be incredibly important is that right now, if you go to a place like Germany, if you go to a place like China, if you want to build, I mean, obviously in China, there's no, it's state run, but in Germany, if you want to build a transmission line, you have to meet certain environmental, certain social hurdles. You have to sort of prove, that the transmission line will not disturb too many people, et cetera. But you have ultimately a regulator you can go to get that answer. In the United States, you don't. There's no one that will really give you a final answer. And that's why the decisions get stretched out for 5 or 10 years. Well, when you're a private industry and you're trying to get investors and you're saying to them, well, we really won't know if we can make a go of this for 5 or 10 years, that's the kiss of death. It's not going to work. And so what the United States could learn from other countries is to have a process where if you want to build transmission, here's what you can do. And you'll get a yes or no answer. Does this make sense? Is this in the national interest? And you'll get it within a certain time frame. 2 or 3 years seems reasonable to me. That's what the United States could learn from other countries that are doing this more successfully.
All right, Russell Gold, author of Superpower, One Man's Quest to Transform American Energy. Thank you so much. Coming up, how do you bring people out of poverty without wrecking the climate in the process? We'll explore how one company is helping rural communities power themselves. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lines, and this is Bloomberg Green. Well, a rural village in Kenya might not be the first place you'd expect to find electric motorcycles, internet service, and thriving local businesses. But a solar-powered mini-grid is making it all possible. U.S.-based energy startup PowerHive is on a mission to supply clean energy to rural communities around the world, bringing economic opportunity without the need for fossil fuels.
In Africa, 650 million people don't have electricity, don't have access to power, don't have access to an industry. People who would otherwise have been very productive if they'd had the means, if they had the capital. It's really important that we don't lose sight of these people in our bid to grow our economies and become more industrialized.
One of the toughest problems in the world is, how do you bring people out of extreme poverty without wrecking the climate in the process? Conventional wisdom says it'll require the burning of enough fossil fuels to cancel out any progress the developed world makes on emissions. But here in rural Kenya, a small experiment is underway to see if it's possible to have the economic uplift without the environmental catastrophe.
PowerHive is the first privately licensed utility in Kenya. We currently operate about 25 village-level microgrids. We're generating our power from solar. We're storing that energy in batteries. When I started in this business 20 years ago, the price per watt of a solar panel was $5, $6. Now it's 20 cents. It's opened up a huge opportunity in Africa to deliver energy.
A micro or mini-grid like the ones built by PowerHive is a power system that supplies enough electricity for a small community. Schools and homes get electric light and internet service. Agricultural labour like maize milling doesn't have to be done by hand anymore. Electric pressure cookers eliminate the need to chop down trees or burn charcoal to make meals. All of these things raise the standard of living, but there's one big problem.
When we first came into Kenya, we quickly realized that our consumers are too poor to pay for energy.
Mini grids have been around for a long, long time. The problem is that there hasn't been an economic model to support the long-term operations of these grids.
It forced us to have to think about how we can support our customers in generating enough income that they can sustain themselves, and then also create a good energy customer for us as a business. In most rural communities in Kenya, subsistence farmers would keep maybe 20 chicken, and these would be primarily for eggs they might sell or consume themselves, really.
But electricity, along with some startup capital from PowerHive, has changed all that. Powered appliances like heat lamps and incubators can transform chicken rearing into a profitable business. It's a virtuous cycle for PowerHive. They give their customers the money and guidance to start businesses that use their electricity. And then a portion of the income from those businesses pays for the electricity.
Kama wamama vile tuko kikundi hivi, tunapata hela ambayo inatusaidia kununua vitu za nyumba. Hasa tena zinachangia kununua hata chakula. Unapata kama uko na kakipo umejiwekea ya hii kutokana na huu mradi, unalipia mtoto kidogo, ingine unampea kama kipa yake ya kuenda kujiendeleza huko shule.
You'll also find that community members who do see successful businesses get inspired to do that themselves. And all of that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't had the exposure or understood how it can be done or that it can be done.
Recently, PowerHive has invested in a new business, leasing electric vehicles to people in the villages and in nearby Kisii town.
My name is Brian Adoyo. I'm running the ground operations for this EV project in this region of Kenya. What we're trying to do here is convert all conventional bikes from petrol engines to electric motors.
Beyond just getting from place to place, motorbikes are key to generating income in this region, where they're often used as taxi vehicles or for transporting goods to market. And while making the switch from gas to electric is obviously cleaner, there are some more tangible benefits as well.
Maintaining electric bikes is way more cheaper than maintaining a conventional bike in terms of servicing.
Electric vehicles, they have fewer moving parts. They don't require oil. You know, here people are spending around $10 every 2 weeks for the maintenance costs. So if we can save somebody $1 or $2 a day, it's a very, very big deal.
It's still early days for mini-grid companies like PowerHive, and it remains to be seen how big the industry's impact can be. A study by Bloomberg NEF found that electricity from solar hybrid mini-grids is still expensive for many rural customers, and the sector suffers from a lack of investment. Meanwhile, large-scale renewables are booming. Bulk solar and wind are the most competitive new sources of energy in most of the world today. But with hundreds of millions of people still living beyond the reach of major grids, there's a massive opportunity to improve lives without the climate paying the cost.
Our business model, if it works, can really change what development means. And what we're trying to do is create a model that can be deployed anywhere in rural communities across the globe.
We have hundreds of millions of people that are going to be joining the modern economy. And these customers cannot do so in a carbon unfriendly way. And here in Kenya, we're showing that you can sort of create this model, which we hope is actually going to serve Africa for generations.
That's it for this week's edition, but keep the conversation going. Follow us on Twitter @Climate. I'm Kaylee Lines, and this is Bloomberg Green.